Master, we would like to know a clue or technique for the awakening of the consciousness. With pleasure, we will give some explanations about the awakening of the consciousness. My dear brothers, first of all, it is necessary to comprehend that the consciousness of human beings is asleep. Unfortunately, people do not want to understand that they are asleep. Everybody thinks they are awake, and however, they are asleep. People drive while asleep, walk in the streets convinced that they are awake, but are profoundly asleep, dreaming. I can affirm that there exists a 97% of subconsciousness and a 3% of consciousness. In other words, we would say that the consciousness is asleep in a 97% and that only a 3% of it is awake. However, there exist people that do not even reach the 3% of awakened consciousness. Normally, some only reach the 2%, and there exist those that only reach the 1%. But if we were to tell them that their consciousness is asleep, they would not believe it. They would feel offended. It is hard to say that to them because they do not believe it. They think that they are awake and think that one is hurting or offending them. It is necessary to awake. The Gospels insist in the necessity of awakening. Unfortunately, they do not teach it. They do not give the clue, the explanation. Therefore, it is necessary to explain it. And this is what we are doing here, teaching the path for the awakening. First of all, we have to be sincerely convinced that we are asleep. When one accepts that one is asleep, it is a signal or symptom that one wants to awake. This is very similar to the mad person. No crazy person will accept that he is crazy. However, all of them believe that they are fine. When a madman accepts the fact that he is crazy, it is a clear signal that he is improving. You can verify this in the insane asylums. There is no one that could accept that one is crazy. Observe those that are almost ready to get out of the madhouse. They accept that they are sick, and that is precisely the clear signal that they are improving. The same happens with those that have an asleep consciousness. They do not accept that they are asleep, but when they already accept it, it is a clear signal that they want to awake, or that they are beginning to awake. How is it possible to attain the awakening? Obviously, we already know that the foundation is in the dissolution of the ego, and that is something that you do not ignore. However, we have to help ourselves with different methods and techniques. Everything that helps to the awakening of the consciousness is useful. I will explain you a technique, but I want you to pay a lot of attention. It is necessary to divide the attention in 3 parts. First, subject. Second, object or objects, and third, location. Subject, self-remembering. Do not forget oneself. In life, one makes very serious mistakes when one forgets oneself. For example, if we forget ourselves in front of a cup of wine, what could happen? We will not only drink it, but so many more that we can end up drunk. Therefore, it would be really serious to forget ourselves before a cup of wine. If we forget ourselves before a person of the opposite sex, what could happen? We could even reach the fornication or adultery, is not it? Therefore, we should never forget ourselves. However, it is very easy to forget oneself. One night, Uspensky committed himself to walk through the streets of St. Petersburg being awake. And I'm saying to walk awake in order to differentiate it from the sleepwalking that is normal among the common people. That man walked and walked in self-vigilance and self-observation, controlling the mind and the senses. He walked everywhere. Suddenly, he wanted to prepare his cigarettes, so he saw a store and entered on it in order to prepare some tobacco. He left the store smoking, but at this point he had already forgotten the exercise that he was practicing. He walked for many streets of St. Petersburg until he entered in his room. On entering into his room, he remembered himself again, and with pain he realized that he had forgotten the exercise and that his consciousness had fallen asleep when he went to the store. Afterwards, he had been in many places walking like a true sleepwalker. He had fallen asleep. Observe how hard it is not to forget oneself. That is to say, to be watching the senses and mind. If one does not control the senses and mind, one falls in the sleep of the consciousness. One has to self-observe one's own feelings, inner impulses, external impulses, instincts, habits, etc., etc., etc. Object or objects. The danger of fascination. The object or objects is the second aspect or stage of the awakening of the consciousness. If, for example, one sees a beautiful object, a suit or a ring, a perfume, anything in a showcase, or as you say in your country, behind a shop window, and one is fascinated with the object, the first thing to happen is for one to fall in the unconsciousness. Why? Because one has forgotten oneself. When one sees the object, there are several processes. First, identification. One forgets oneself and is self-identified with the object. One says, "How beautiful, how attractive it is. If I would have money, I would buy it." Afterwards comes the fascination with the object, with the dress, and the profound sleep of the consciousness. What happens with the television, Venerable Master? People in front of the television forget themselves and fall in the fascination with the program and dream a lot. Since the invention of television, the unity of the homes has been lost. For example, the husband comes tired from the job and the wife does not come to receive him with open arms. The man does not have that happiness anymore. Why? Because she is watching television. He may need her and she is busy watching the soap opera. She's fascinated. However, do not blame women only. No. Men also become fascinated with the different programs to the point that they forget what is happening at home. That is a living example of the sleep of the consciousness. Location. Constant questioning. Every place has to be observed in a careful form, even a known place, the living room, the bedroom. Every day observe the bedroom as something new, to learn to see it in a different form. Wherever we arrive, the first thing that one has to say to oneself is, well, why am I here? What do I have to do in this place? It is indispensable if one wants to awake the consciousness. It comes to my memory a very interesting experience. Many years ago, I went to a house. I walked through a beautiful garden. I crossed the threshold of the living room, and finally I entered in a room where there was a lawyer's office. In the room there was a lovely lady. I was speaking with her when suddenly I saw over the desk two very beautiful glass butterflies. What astonished me most was that these two butterflies were alive. They moved their wings, they were made of glass, and small heads and antennas. They were glass, of multiple colors. Then I said to myself, how come that these butterflies of glass can do all of this, can be alive? Obviously, this kind of phenomena can only happen in the astral world, because in the physical world that is completely impossible. I looked around and I said to myself, what am I doing in this lawyer's office? Observing other objects, I could see on the right side corner a candelabra of 7 arms, and on the left side another candelabra of 7 arms. That lady was speaking with me very politely. I decided to ask her to let me go out for a moment. I simulated going to the washroom. Of course, she politely let me out. Once outside, I said to myself, I will do an experiment. So I jumped with the intention of floating in the atmosphere, which certainly happened. Then I said to myself, I am an astral body. I returned to that office and took a seat. The lady was waiting for me, so I said to her, Madam, I want you to know that in this moment we are in astral body. Remember, madam, that you lie down to sleep some hours ago, and your body in this moment is sleeping on the bed. I was waiting an intelligent answer from that lady, but what I saw in her eyes were the eyes of a sleepwalker. Obviously, her consciousness was completely asleep, and she did not understand anything that I was saying to her. Well, realizing that she was profoundly asleep, what did I do? I said goodbye and left.
I went to California floating in my astral body because I needed to do some investigations there. On my way to California, I saw a man who had died long ago who was carrying a heavy weight on his back. It was clear that he had been a carrier of heavy weights in some market. That unfortunate man had disembodied long ago, but he believed that was still alive. I went close to him and I said, "My friend, what is happening? Why do you carry that heavy weight on your back?" The answer was, "I am working. I am working." "But what are you saying, my friend? Do you not realize that you are dead and that heavy weight that you carry on your back is just a mere mental form created by yourself?" He did not understand. He looked at me with eyes of sleepwalker. He did not understand anything that I was saying. I floated around him and over his head in order to see if in this form he might understand, but everything was useless. He did not understand. He was asleep. The unfortunate had never done anything during his life in order to awake the consciousness, and he was asleep. His consciousness was asleep. I continued my travel in direction to California. I needed to investigate some schools, etc. Afterwards, I peacefully returned to my physical body. The years went by, I think at least 30 years. One day, I had to go to Taxco, Guerrero. Certainly, that town is very rich in silver mines, and it is said that the silver artifacts are very cheap. In reality, they are not so cheap. What really abounds is the tourism, because the place is very attractive, is located on a hill, and is totally colonial, beautiful, and has an extraordinary landscape. I had to have a meeting with a certain person that in those days I was trying to cure from a hemiplegia that had paralyzed half of his body. I went there with the intention of helping him. Certainly, I think that he was healed. I made him to walk using magnetism, and he did so without the cane, after having paralyzed half of the body. I gave him indications. I recommended him to move a lot because he was all the time seated, and that was prejudicing his healing. Well, summing it up, I will tell you that I crossed the garden of a very beautiful house and walked through the living room. I immediately recognized the place where I had been so many years ago. Finally, I entered in an office. In the office was waiting a lady, which I recognized immediately because was the same that I had seen in the astral many years ago. She said, "Come in, sir." This time, the only different thing was that I did not see her before the desk, but her husband, a gentleman of mature age, lawyer but not graduated, that is to say, a tinterillo. Here in Mexico, we call them coyotes. Yes, that is the term that we have here for the tinterillos. Standing up, he welcomed me and offered me a seat before his desk. They also seated the patient that I had to heal. We spoke about magnetism because I was going to utilize it, and about the prana, about the psychic healing, about the astral projections, the healing from far distances, etc., etc., etc. The conversation was very interesting. That person had certain disposition for this kind of psychic studies and some incipient information, good enough to understand something about astral projections. I said to him, "I know this office, because some years ago I came here." That man was astonished, perplexed. I said to him, "I know your wife also," and I explained him my experience, what we had spoken, how I had seen his wife, etc., etc., etc. At supper, being seated around the table, his wife said to me, "I know you from long time ago, but I do not remember the exact place. You are not an unknown person to me." I immediately touched his elbow, saying to him, "Are you convinced now?" He answered, "I am absolutely convinced." Well, that man had received clear facts, and if it were not because he was a member of a certain dogmatic sect, and because his religious leaders would not have forgiven him, for sure he would have come to the doctrine. I have narrated this with the intention to help you understand how the consciousness has to be awakened, and I am doing so with real situations. I also remember an interesting case that happened to me about 40 years ago. I saw myself in a large room speaking with a group of people about esoteric things. However, because I do not forget myself, secondly, because I like to observe carefully the objects, the things, and thirdly, because I never stay in a place in an unconscious form, but I observe the place carefully and I ask to myself, why am I here? What am I doing here? Obviously, on that occasion, those three aspects of the division of the attention became active. Firstly, I said to myself, well, what am I doing here? I did not forget myself and observed the place. What am I doing? I observed the people. I saw the people that were around me. Why am I speaking with them? Everything looked like physical and material. Those friends were wearing overcoats, and therefore nothing indicated that we could be in the astral world. Frankly, the objects were normal, but I did not forget myself. At the time of observing that place, I was saying to myself, why am I in this place? Why am I in this meeting if I have not made an appointment with anyone? Why am I in this room? Everything looked so physical, so material that it seemed that my questions were out of place. There were no details that could indicate that I was in the astral world, but I have always divided my attention in three parts: subject, object, and location. What did I do? I excused myself and I pretended that I was going to the washroom, or perhaps that I was going to breathe some fresh air. Once out of the place, I did a small jump with the intention of floating, and certainly I floated in the atmosphere. Convinced that I was in the astral body, I returned to the room, I took a seat in the chair where I was seated, and I said to everybody, my friends, I have to inform you that we are an astral body. Everybody saw each other with a kind of amazement, and some of them in the physical world studied esotericism, occultism, etc. They did not understand me. They saw each other, and one of them said, "No, we are in the physical world. You're crazy. Where did you get the idea that we are in the astral?" I said them, "Yes, we are in the astral." However, because no one wanted to believe me, I went out of the room with the intention of doing some esoteric investigations. Afterwards, I returned to the physical body. But observe how I awakened through the division of the attention in three parts: subject, object, and location. One of our brothers will ask a question. Master, at the time that one asks oneself, what am I doing here? Do I have to answer to myself? When one asks this question to oneself, instead of beginning to give explanations to oneself, one has to open oneself to the new and to do the experiment. If one cannot jump in the place, then one has to ask for permission and do what I did, to get out and to jump outside. Perhaps in the street, perhaps in the garden, in order to know if one is in the astral. However, it happens that many times the person, even though he has asked himself the question and jumps, he does not float, because his mind unconsciously puts weight where there is no weight. That is to say, the person, in a subconscious or infraconscious manner, believes that one is in the physical world. Therefore, at the time of jumping, he puts in the mind a non-existent weight. Then the person self-deceits himself, saying, I am in the physical dimension, and the experiment fails. One has to get out of the doubt. If at the moment of jumping one does not float, then one has to stand up on something and jump. Then you will see that if you are in the astral, you will float. Master, when I ask to myself about the subject, who am I, in order to be aware of oneself, I think the exercise is not in that form. I think that one has to observe oneself. I would like you to explain it. What one has to do in that moment is not forget oneself. That is all. There is no need to ask oneself, who am I, and all of those things. I repeat, in that moment what one has to do is not forget oneself, ever. Object, to contemplate every object and to observe if there exists something strange and rare. Location, why am I here? It is a question that one has to do to oneself. If one goes to another place, to ask oneself, what am I doing here? Does this have to be done permanently, Venerable Master? This has to be done from instant to instant, from moment to moment, until it becomes a habit, until it becomes instinctive. Afterwards, one will work instinctively. But in the beginning and during long time, it is necessary to practice it rigorously. It will happen that this exercise practiced in the waking state will be engraved in the subconsciousness that later will work automatically during the sleep hours. You may have seen that many times one has dreams that are related with the events of the day, and it can also happen that one could have a big preoccupation and dreams about it at night. Well, knowing that aspect of the mind, this is why it is convenient to practice this exercise intensively. When one becomes used to it, the exercise is repeated automatically during the sleep hours, and then comes the awakening of the consciousness. When one practices this exercise during the time that one is out of the body, obviously the result is the awakening of the consciousness. Because at the moment to do the small jump, one floats and awakes. But it is necessary to become well used to this exercise during the waking state, so it can be repeated automatically during the sleep hours. It is convenient to know that during the sleep hours, the soul, the being, is out of the physical body. During the sleep hours, the psychic or psychic material, even though it is bottled up among the ego, is out of the physical body. And being the ego out of the body, it is clear that one lives in those regions in the same form as in the physical world. If in those moments one does the exercise, then the result is the awakening of the consciousness. Once one is awake, it is possible to go to any place of the earth. One can go to the temples of mysteries, can invoke the ineffable beings and to speak with them face to face, to receive direct teachings from the great masters, etc., etc., etc. Master, is every dream an astral projection, or in some cases is a mental projection? Well, during the sleep hours, the ego cannot stay in the body, because if the ego would stay among the physical body during the sleep hours, then the vital body, or linga sarira, would not be able to repair the physical body. Normally, the vital body, or linga sarira, repairs the body during the hours when the ego is absent. During that time, the thyroid gland secretes a lot of biological iodine that disinfects the organism. The solar plexus works intensively, and in those moments, the hepatic plexus captures the solar energy and distributes it to all the channels of the grand sympathetic nervous system. When the ego returns once again to the body, that body is already repaired and ready for the new activities of the day. The ego walks in the inner worlds through the suprasensible regions of nature and cosmos, and the dreams that the ego has out of the physical body are just mere projections of the mind, because the ego is mind. It delivers everything and projects its dreams, lives its dreams. However, there are situations when the psyche, the essence, can momentarily perceive things that are not dreams. For example, can perceive revelations from the great masters or receive some special illumination. But that happens only in very rare occasions. Normally, people live in the world of the dreams, projecting their dreams and dreaming. If the awakening of the consciousness is what we want, we have to awake here and now. He that awakes here and now awakes in all the corners of the universe. It is here where we need to awake. This means, Master, that our attention is constantly projected to outside. So because of that, we forget ourselves. And what we need is to direct the attention to inside. That is to say, not to forget what I am, who I am, and locate myself here where I am listening to you. In other words, to create a center of attention within myself. Am I correct? Of course, that is obvious. Do not forget oneself. The person that forgets himself falls in the sleep of the consciousness. I repeat, it is here where we need to awake. He that awakes here awakes everywhere. Master, from your explanations, I understand that one lives all of the time out of oneself, and from the moment of waking up in the morning to the moment of going to bed, and even during the hours of sleep, one walks unconsciously, not knowing why or what for. Isn't it? Yes. What we need is not forget ourselves ever, to create a habit from it. Yes. In the astral world, you are always unconscious and not remembering yourselves, because here in the physical world, you never remember yourselves. One realizes this especially when driving. One feels astonished observing how people cross before the cars. They just jump under the wheels. That is something terrible. Everybody walks absorbed in their own thoughts, remembering the godfather, the godmother, the business, this or that. They do not remember themselves, so any car can kill them. Master, could it be possible that a person dreams that he's dreaming? That is to say, he goes to sleep and afterwards he brings the memory of a dream within the dream. Well, it may also happen that one dreams that one is awake, but one is not awake yet. To awake is what really counts, and not to dream that one is awake. When the person has an asleep consciousness, all of those things happen to him. But the awakened person, to the really awakened person, that class of phenomena do not exist. The awakened person lives in an intense waking state during the time when the physical body is on the bed. Master, when one gets an astral projection and does not see the body on the bed, does that mean that one is asleep? Yes. That is not exact, because if the person moves away, if he does not feel interest in the body, if he does not think in the body, if he is busy in other things of the universe, then that has no importance. That is to say, he can be awake and does not see his body on the bed. Venerable Master, on a certain occasion, when I was trying to awake consciousness in the dream, I felt that I had not slept. However, I felt that I was out and into my body. The bedroom was dark, and I said to myself, well, if I'm sleeping, the bedroom has to be dark. Then I opened my eyes and I saw that there was clarity. I couldn't find an explanation for this phenomenon. I tried to see things around me, but only could perceive a clarity. Could you explain me that? It was a scission of the consciousness. That is to say, part of the consciousness may have been trapped inside the physical body, into the personality, and part out of the personality. It was a process of scission of the consciousness. Master, when a person leaves an astral body and has a vision in those regions that he does not understand, what does that mean? Well, that has a lack of intuition. Master, why when a person goes to astral and sees his own being, his intimus, he does not know who that being is and what it represents? He does not understand him because of lack of intuition. Anyway, the exercise of astral projection is very interesting. For many people, it is hard to learn to leave the physical body voluntarily. I think that it is indispensable to awaken, because when one is awakened, the problem of the astral projection disappears immediately. What would you recommend to those that practice the astral projection, are very intellectual, reason so much about the astral projection, and when they do leave the body, it is in an unconscious manner? Well, first of all, to awake the consciousness.
Inferential peace. Samael Aun Weor.